the stimulus funds were used for the video demonstration and market assessment of a CoPilot training system that a team of researchers and I, particularly Emma Smith, who was a PhD student, and Bill Miller from Occupational Sciences and Occupational Therapy, had developed over the previous decade or so. And just to give you some context, what we were actually trying to develop over that decade was a smart wheelchair. We wanted to design a wheelchair that could be used for older adults who had cognitive impairments and needed some kind of assistance to use a power wheelchair safely. A number of new technologies have become available, and in particular in the robotics space, that made us think that this was a feasible project to undertake. And we had this team that Bill put together called CanWheel that ran through the early 20-teens, looking at three questions. How are power wheelchairs used now? How could they be used better? And how could they be better? And that middle one is about training, and the last one is about technology development. So I was really focused on the last one, but there was also a lot of work on the training front and also longitudinal studies to see how people are using their chairs now. So our goal was to develop this smart wheelchair that could be used in long-term care centers. We chose to start with long-term care centers because they have the population that we were targeting, and we know that you can actually navigate a power wheelchair around in those centers because the doorways are wide enough, for example. Our long-term goal is to get out into the community, but simple navigation in a home with a power wheelchair is already a big problem because many homes have doorways that are too narrow. Our goal was to share control between the driver of the wheelchair and the automation system. I'm not quite sure what we might call that. And so what we set out to do was to figure out ways of sharing that control. And the initial project, or the initial trial, took several years to get the technology to the point where we could actually trial it, and we very quickly found problems. And so we were faced with this question of how do we try out other modes of interaction without taking years to develop the technology to allow us to implement those interactions. And yet our plan was to go forward with the Wizard of Oz study, which I imagine many of you in the DFP community have heard about before. We weren't aware of it before we started this work. But the idea is to have somebody, the wizard, pretend to be the smart wheelchair. And that wizard is really good at it. And it says hidden there, although in fact, our wizard, whose name was Bikram, was in the room controlling the wheelchair and pretending to be the smart wheelchair during these trials. So we did trials using something called the Power Mobility Indoor Driving Assessment. And the idea here is that you can do it in the user's own environment. So you can very quickly set up these assessments in whatever environment the user is in so that you can test them in a familiar setting. And so we had these 5 scenarios that we wanted to test, and we had 3 control policies that required different interventions from Bikram. Either he would slow the wheelchair down if it got close to an obstacle, he would steer it away if it got too close to an obstacle, or he would actually drive like the perfect autonomous wheelchair. So this was no sharing at all. We just told them what the task was. We said, whenever you're ready, we can start, and then Bikram would complete the task. And the idea here was to see whether people would enjoy a perfect autonomous wheelchair. So this is the teleoperator interface that Bikram was using. You can see Bikram back in the corner there. This is the back-in parking scenario. Bikram was using a PS4 joystick with all the controls, did various things. And he also had this visual display of what was going on mounted on the back of the wheelchair so he could see what was happening at all times. 10 participants, it took about 4 months, incredible process challenge. Pooja Viswanathan was a postdoc at the time, former PhD student from UBC. She ran this thing. It was an amazing amount of work for her and Bikram to get it done. I won't talk any more about the study, but what we did discover during this study was that the staff members at the long-term care centers were looking very jealously at Bikram's remote control joystick. And that's because the only such thing that's available in commercial use is a sort of industrial looking big yellow thing with a big huge cord that sticks out the front and plugs into the back of the joystick. And it's called the attendant control. And when you plug it in, it completely overrides the user's control. So either the attendant is in control or the user is control, nothing in between. And you have to follow around on the end of this cord. Now, the wireless joystick idea is not available commercially, but it's straightforward technically. And in fact, we had some evidence from manufacturers that they had this technology and were using it in their manufacturing facilities to make it easy to move the wheelchairs around, like when they needed to load the wheelchairs onto a truck. So the real question that they didn't want to bring it to commercialization because of liability concerns. And so what we thought, based on the training stuff that came out of the CanWheel project, was could we maybe use the remote control in a controlled setting where a trainer who knows how to use it is using it in a constrained environment and demonstrate that it has effectiveness as a training technique. And in fact, the current training technology is terrible. You stand beside the wheelchair, and if something starts to go wrong, you grab the joystick. And this is not good for anybody. A lot of bumped shins. So this was the idea behind the CoPilot system. We did go through a series of, I can't remember if they were interviews or focus groups to redesign the technology, simplify the joystick. The focus groups told us very clearly they did not want this in a smartphone. They wanted it in a one-handed joystick configuration. And then Emma, as her thesis, ran an RCT to look at whether or not the this could be used in a training protocol. And her results show that it's as effective as the current standard of care, and the participants and trainers much preferred the remote control joystick. So that's sort of, we were getting to the end of that. The RCT was ongoing at the time that we applied to DFP for the funding, and we had no idea what to do with this after the project, after we completed the RCT. How do you get this out to industry? How do you convince somebody to actually create such a device? And so we applied to DFP to get funding to create a short video to demonstrate the system. And I can see that I'm up against it in terms of time. Jocelyn, can I run the video, or do you want me to stop now?
Yes, I actually have a quick announcement. Professor Leanne Curry is not able to join us today. She does not have power right now. So we are down one of our 4 speakers. So yes, you definitely have time for your video demonstration.
Oh, oops. I forgot to click on the, oh no, I did click on the share computer sound. Okay, so I'm gonna mute this, unmute this. That's Emma.
CoPilot is a remote control override for a powered wheelchair similar to a driving training car that has a second steering wheel and brake. With the CoPilot remote, a clinician or a caregiver can override the speed, the direction, or have an emergency stop for the powered wheelchair while the user is driving in a seamless way. This doesn't require a mode switch or any interaction with the chair itself, only an interaction with the handheld remote. CoPilot has an opportunity to be used as a training tool, whether it's by a clinician providing a demonstration of how a task actually works while the user's in the chair, by using different training techniques like grading or chaining, or by simply helping somebody in and out of a tight space to provide them with the skills they need to be able to do it independently, CoPilot can be there as the partner in the training process and ensure that the user remains safe throughout the entire learning process, as well as the safety of the others in the environment around them and the trainer themselves. We also have the opportunity to use CoPilot as a caregiver tool. With the remote in hand, a caregiver can take their loved one into an environment where they may not feel comfortable taking them otherwise, perhaps to a park, across a busy street, or to the mall. The caregiver can rest easy, knowing that they have the remote that they're able to override in the case of an emergency, or if they're just concerned about their user's safety. The user can be comfortable knowing that somebody has their back and is able to support them when the time is right.
So one of the main reasons I find this technology so beneficial is it gives everybody an opportunity to be assessed for powered mobility. So regardless of whether your clients or residents or patients have different forms of cognitive impairment, dementias, things like that, they'll still get an opportunity to be assessed in a very controlled environment. And because powered mobility gives people so much independence, it's so important that everybody gets assessed when they have been identified as potentially appropriate. And from using the technology with clients, what I find is that it really reduces their anxiety and improves their confidence with driving from an earlier stage in the process of training. So typically when we're training with people, they bump into environmental obstacles, even if you tell them to stop. And the only way to avoid that is by physically interjecting and taking their hand off the joystick. But with the CoPilot technology, you're able to redirect them in a very safe and controlled way, and then reflect on why you changed their direction after the fact, rather than having them bump into something and then they become very anxious, which then negatively impacts their driving after that happens. So it's really fantastic.
We believe everybody has a right to independent mobility. CoPilot makes that possible.
Okay, so can people hear me again? Excellent. So that's the video that was developed, and then building on that video, Emma performed a market survey of mostly occupational therapists and physical therapists to judge their interest in technology like this, with the goal of taking this information to the manufacturers to see if they might be willing to bring it out as a commercial product. And that market survey was beautifully wrapped up in March of 2020. And yeah, everybody got kind of distracted at that point. So that's sort of the status we're at. And I see Bill has told me that there has been some communication with manufacturers again. So I am hopeful that we may have the possibility of taking this project forward. And it really is thanks to the efforts of an enormous team that we were able to do this. And in particular, on the CoPilot training system, Emma did an enormous amount of work developing a training program that was based on zero error techniques to try to ensure that people feel comfortable building up their skills rather than getting quite anxious about piloting the wheelchair around. So thank you very much for your attention, and I guess we're going to take questions at the end.
Perfect, thanks, Ian. I think we can pass things over to Alan now. Alan, I'll let you take over.
Great, so hopefully everyone can see this big blue screen on their computer. So my proposal was called RIVR, Research in Virtual Reality. And I'm just going to really kind of give you the big picture of what it was about, and then talk about 4 kind of outcomes that we've had, some deliverables from this project. So the problem that we were interested in addressing was the issue that, there's a lot of interest in virtual reality, both by industry such as Facebook and Google, and also academic institutions, obviously, such as UBC. But primarily the research is focused on ways to enhance the experience of virtual reality by making the hardware lighter, making the software programs more immersive, by increasing the range of delivery platforms. But what RIVR wanted to do was to develop ways for research to be done with VR, so to use it as a research tool rather than as an experience to be researched. With the funding, what we did is 4 main kind of deliverables. First, we sought to build a small network of researchers, and I can talk later during the Q&A maybe about why we thought it was important to have a small group of researchers. We held 3 workshops and also invited an expert in VR, Dr. Cade McCall from the University of York in England. And this brought together research labs and students and faculty from psychology, computer science, and kinesiology. And our discussions focused on a few primary points. One was, well, what ways are we wanting to use VR as a research tool? What are the hurdles that we're encountering when we want to share our hardware and software assets with one another? And some possible solutions to overcome those barriers. So I'll give you one example of us working through a problem on such a barrier. So my lab programs its VR work mainly in Unity. And one kind of project we've done that's been pretty important for us has been to integrate Pupil Labs eye trackers into an HTC Vive, so we can eye track people in VR while they're moving around an environment. Now, Mark Carpenter does his programming primarily in Vizard, and he was really interested in our hardware asset and trying to get it into his work where he studies fear of falling and postural control when you put people up in real heights or you actually put them into a virtual raised platform. So here's, we worked together, I had several students working with his team, and we gave advice, and together we were able to solve this problem. So here's an example of a movie taken in a VR environment. The green dots, if you can see them, they're just tiny there, indicate where the person's looking. This is in the HTC Vive and the Pupil Labs, but it's off his software program, where what he's done is he's raised a participant onto a virtual platform, so they're looking down on an individual. And it turns out that this work actually is as effective as actually raising someone up on a real platform. We've also used some of the money to hire developers to help us create a VR porthole that other researchers can use. This porthole will allow researchers to make VR studies available to individuals with VR headsets at home. The data is stored here at UBC, and obviously right now during the pandemic, it's really important to be able to do this where you can actually have VR testing remotely. It also will work with Google Cardboard or equivalent. And while it currently runs off of VR Unity programs, it should in principle be able to work with other platforms such as Vizard, but that needs to be confirmed. And finally, we've recently had some industry collaboration potentials begin. So our network was reached out to me in particular through the Emerging Media Lab at UBC, who wanted to try to connect us with a company that was interested in creating and measuring emotional responses within VR. Because we had our network now in place, I was able to link that company to the researchers who I thought could help integrate physiological biofeedback systems into VR to monitor and analyze an individual's emotional and physiological responses. And the company, it turns out, is very keen to acquire MyTax and NSERC engage in alliance funding to help support this research. So that's really quite encouraging. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan. We'll now pass things over to Karen.
Sorry, I was just making notes on some things I want to follow up with Alan on after seeing his talk. Let's see if I can get ready here. Is that visible to people?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I'm the last in the lineup to talk today. And so we did something a little bit different than the other. Also, there's an element of network development to all of these. So the particular problem that I and my buddies were trying to solve here, this one actually goes largely outside of UBC, is the problem of doing haptics research in Canada. And I don't think these problems are specific to Canada or anywhere in particular. It just happens to be that we are pretty, we know each other, and at successive HCI conferences, we started to realize that we actually had a potential to do stuff together, and there was potential in banding together to do things that we could do as a group that doesn't do other configurations maybe aren't quite as helpful. And we do have some idiosyncratic challenges. And so one particular thing, not too unusual, is I'm presuming that most of the audience is aware what I mean when I say haptics research, is that this is actually research that pertains to doing things with a sense of touch, usually building or using specialized hardware, and then working in the application space and the design space. There's many different aspects of it. Some haptics researchers focus on building and inventing hardware. Some work on understanding perceptual aspects of what people's perceptual experience is when using haptics, and some people work on designing applications, and there's many other possible things. A very hot new area, kind of building off of what Alan was just talking about, is to add physicality to virtual reality or augmented reality experiences, that when you can actually move around in a somewhat mobile way, and which also presents challenges. I'm not going to really talk about anything like that. I'm not going to talk about the research itself. I'm just going to talk about the fact that we have a bunch of people across Canada who are doing different aspects, different haptics research, and what we have in common is that we do haptics research of different sorts. But we're all singletons. In each case, we're the only one at our university who's doing this kind of work. Again, many people are in that situation. Everyone is in that situation if you define it narrowly enough. But we have special needs. You know, we need hardware. We need all kinds of different stuff. Our students need specialized training. Our system building. There's just a lot of infrastructure and development that each of us needs. And one of the ideas that started to come up in these conversations was, is there some way we could collaborate? And one of the specific opportunities that we saw was that not only do we actually get along and enjoy working with each other, is that we sort of corner the market on doing human-computer interaction in haptics. Haptics is quite the majority and the people who've been working on it longer are engineers and focused on building hardware. And the whole idea of using human-computer interaction to move it forward and actually design applications is relatively new. Maybe in the last 10 years it started to be a thing, especially in the last 5 years. And we have more of the bridge people who are active in both communities, the HCI community and the haptics community, traditional engineering, are people who are in Canada. A couple of them are my own trainees who have gone off to become professors elsewhere, so maybe that's not a total coincidence. But anyway, we could say maybe there's a particular flavor of haptics research in Canada that maybe looks a little different than other places. So if we actually want, so I'm calling this Haptic HCI. And we're wondering if we actually tried to establish a talent center, maybe there's a number of different problems we could solve. We could deal with the singleton problem. We could share some kinds of resources. We could combine our training. We could have some branding. We could attract different kinds of companies. Another challenge we have is there's not very many companies in Canada who are good partners for this kind of work, but maybe with a larger footprint, larger critical mass, and a more diverse set of specializations. You know, we kind of bring different parts of the problem together, that we could actually attract some larger collaborations and companies. And this would be an interesting thing to do. But we had a lot of work to do to define that story and actually understand what the value versus the effort involved and whether this was actually a good idea to do at all. And so it just wasn't getting very far when our conversations were limited to these, have lunch at a conference that we're all at. And so we wondered how we could actually move it forward. And so we requested DFP funds for an organizing workshop. We actually held this just over a year ago in October, so pre-pandemic. We found a time when some of us were traveling from another conference and it was possible for the Vancouver people to stop off in Toronto on the way home. And we did it in Toronto Airport Hotel, and we got a group of us together to do that. Listed the attendees here, you see there's kind of a mix of universities that really span the country. And what the funds actually paid for was, the cost of putting on a meeting. I highlighted one thing that I thought was pretty valuable, which was we made sure we had facilitator time. We flew Jocelyn out there to be part of it, and then the University of Waterloo Games Institute contributed time from two quite experienced facilitators who do this as a professional job at the Games Institute. And I think Jocelyn will agree with me that we learned a lot from them in terms of how Jocelyn's job might look and some of the things she might do. And Jocelyn made some professional networking in that sense as well. We requested $10,000, ended up spending $7,600 and what we call JOS hours, which were a couple days of JOS's time to actually go and help put this thing on. And so here we are in our very exciting hotel room. And so one thing I want to say, we had 3 facilitators there. That was important. They were actually a significant proportion of the group. They were really important in terms of making this thing be productive. Here's the DFP folks. So those are people who actually came from UBC to come to Toronto. And then these are people who are additionally trained at UBC, but now are out in other places in Canada. So I would say that UBC was a fairly influential part of this happening, but we certainly aren't the whole part of it. And so this is just some of the output. Looks very familiar, brainstorming, post-it notes, poster sheets, but some of the things that we were talking about, who we are, kind of the challenges we're having, cost of system building, learning curves too high, can't build on others' work. This is something that's due to the fact that everyone's using different hardware. It's very difficult to design for this. Something that's was really homed in on is the challenges of designing in remote teams, which then COVID happened and made this all the more poignant, that it's very hard to do good haptic design when you can't be there in the same room with each other. How would a network make impact? How do you make it sustainability? And we are sort of honing in on this idea of a training program was of great interest to us. And this is, of course, I was saying, no, we've already got to create a UBC. I was like, don't need another one because it's just not going to happen. So we'll see how that went. And so the workshop outcome, that was 13 months ago. So we had this one session and we came out with, okay, a mission statement. I think it needs some work. You'll see that we're really struggling to say, how do you draw the circle? How do you define this? Is it really about haptics? Is it about an application domain? Is it about robotics? Is it more the hardware side, the HCI side? And I don't think we've answered that question yet. To some extent, this is a matter of who wants to join, and then they get to decide what you call this thing. We're calling it CanHaptics for now, for lack of a better one. But I don't think it's the right thing to just say, oh, it's a group of people who do haptics. I think it needs to have a little bit more than that. We're still figuring that out. But we were much more clear on what we were lacking and what we hoped a network could provide. Was mind share and continuity, shared training resources. Again, I bold-faced ones that we found a way to act on. We have an idea of if we could raise fund, like if the classic, if you had $1 million, what would you do with it? And then that gives you motivation to say, do I need to go and raise $1 million? Shared personnel, like engineers who could actually go around to different sites. And maybe if each of us doesn't have our own engineer, maybe we hire one part-time between institutes and they actually visit each other. Or there's a network of engineers. Maybe we have some locus like the Western one and the Eastern one. And then trying to have, some body of hardware that is present at each location so that you can actually share it. All of these things would actually be very helpful if you're trying to collaborate and building on each other's work. Branding, matchmaking, funding for students, travel mobility for collaborations, like that's on hold right now. And then the next steps was that we actually leaned towards this shared training as a path to deepen the network, as it was so hard to make a good haptics course that covers all the bases. You just have to be a generalist. You have to cover so many different things. I thought we have this wonderful opportunity where we have 5 different faculty whose haptics expertise overlaps, but also is unique. And if we could share that experience with our students, that we could have a way better course than if we each did it by ourselves. Now, I'm the only one in the group who has been teaching a haptics course for many years. And so guess what happened? It's probably not a big surprise. We decided finally to take the jump, and in 3 weeks, we'll be launching the first CanHaptics course. I'm teaching it not for credit, but we're going to have one of the biggest, well, 25 students at 5 sites are currently signed up for it. And what we're going to do is actually take my course, UBC CPSC 543, which I've taught many times in a few different versions, and offer it with revision, considerable revision, by the 5 instructors and a couple of postdocs at 5 universities in 1 term, with cross-institutional teams working on a shared project. So one of the reasons this became of great interest to us is that we're specifically interested in the problem of remote teams and how you can make groups work together. And so, as I enjoy doing, we decided I'm willing to do this work in part because I want to study the teams. I want to see how this works. Supporting these student teams is actually my research project. And so this will be a great opportunity to do that. And even enlisted one of our CREATE students, and her work with me is going to be to hopefully get some of the insight from this. And so how are we doing this? In a typical year, I would have these students sitting in, coming into a lab. Actually, we've been offering it in the DFP studio since we've had that space all set up with tool benches, and I go in there and we literally do hands-on stuff together, building things together and working with each other. How are we going to make this work when everyone is working out of their apartment? So there's some changes. Each student's going to have a $400 haptic device at home. This is actually supplied by a company which is run by one of my trainees, Haptic Robotics in Montreal. And he's not giving them to us, he's giving us a discounted cost, but we figure that these are good lab equipment that we're willing to buy and keep for many years and pass out to students doing this kind of thing. So each student will have the same hardware. And there'll also be a haptic sketching component. I don't have time to go into all the details, but there is, right now, I was in the meeting just before this, I was talking to the team, and we're kind of working at the lecture schedule and how we can distribute the lectures across all of us and modify the lectures from what I had before to one that better incorporates the special expertise of all of us, and redesign the project to work here. So I will tell you how it goes in April. Just say that we've done this once before with a more limited scale as a design competition at a major international conference in 2017, and learned tons from that, and it became this paper that I've cited down here. And so I'm eager to see this course kind of being the next step of that research. But anyway, this network is launching with the thing we most want to do. Maybe this will be another CREATE in a few years after the present one for DFP ends, but it's an experiment, a pandemic experiment. I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Karen.
I think none of us stuck to your 8 minutes except maybe Alan.
I was just thinking that actually timed well, since Leanne wasn't able to join us because of her power. I think we got to get a little bit more information from everybody. So we're going to move into our Q&A period. We have just over 10 minutes for that. And then we hope to engage everyone in sort of an open floor discussion of what these project stimulus funds, how effective were they? And is this something that as a group would be interested in doing again in the future, remembering that we would need to find funding for it. So starting with the Q&A portion, feel free to turn on your camera and your mic if you want to ask the question yourself, or you could put it in the chat box and I'll read it out. And remember, you could ask a question of any of our speakers, doesn't have to be just one.
I would also suggest that since we've a little shorter on time, that it could be either long-term sustainability or specific questions to the presenters.
Sure. Yeah, I see Christina has her hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself? And
I think I am unmuted.
Oh, you are. Perfect.
Okay. All right, thanks for the great presentations and for Jocelyn to organize. So I had a question for Ian, and I was curious to know a little bit more about, you know, the whole experience of creating this video. So where did you find the people? I guess you had some professional video makers, or this was done by the research group, or if you can just say a little bit about the practical details, because it's very interesting and incredibly useful. So
to be honest, the process idea I got from Jocelyn when Jocelyn did those DFP sessions with faculty members, and so when we submitted this proposal, we had the same kind of thing in mind. We ended up using a videographer, a local videographer, works under the company Oxford Films. I can provide contact information for that. And as you saw, it was entirely Emma's show, but my understanding is that it was relatively straightforward. They basically took a day of shooting in and around GF Strong, and then the videographer took a couple of weeks to put it together. We got a draft. We had a couple of changes to make to the initial draft, and yeah, it was very, very minimal effort on our part to put that video together. It turned out really well, and it was incredibly useful in the survey, the subsequent survey, to be able to show people what we were talking about.
so being able to communicate the concept to the videographer was not too challenging. You're saying it worked out pretty well.
Emma did that, so I could put you in touch with Emma about how complicated the storyboarding was, for example. But I don't think it was. It certainly wasn't anywhere near as complicated as the market survey.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have any questions? Feel free to type them in the chat or just unmute yourself.
Hello.
Oh, Lisa?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Tamara. I'll come after you.
Sorry, it's Anna, but
go Anna, ahead. Sorry.
I just had a quick question about the course. Where was it advertised, and like, how did students find out that they could take it? That's to you, Karen.
To me, yeah. Not strictly too late to join, I guess. I didn't advertise it because I was going to very tightly restrict enrollment. As you saw, there's a certain per capita head tax on offering it. And so I only offered it to my own students. I communicated with them, and I actually have 3 students from University of Saskatchewan and University of Manitoba who are taking my course, my version of the course, through the Western Deans Agreement, because that was easier logistically to do it that way. But I didn't advertise it because I could not handle a large enrollment, and I was very uncertain. I'm not completely certain how it will go. It's like, as you can see, it's an experiment. If someone who's listening on this call is really excited about taking it, get in touch with me. I think we probably have capacity to take on a couple more. I could still order another device or 2, but yeah, it's an experiment, so I was scared.
Karen, this is also a sort of a comment and a question. I know that you know from our conversations with some of our healthcare folks that there's a group of clinician scientists who are bridge people between research and clinical practice, and those types of folk are very few and far between. And one of the ways that we addressed that was actually setting up a national training program. And I don't know, my experience with CREATE grants seems to be that they happen in local universities, but oh, not necessarily. Okay. Yeah. So
ours is actually sort of unusual that way.
Okay.
Yeah, many are cross university.
Yeah, so it took a while to organize and get sort of established and all the rest of it, but it did run for a fairly long period of time, and it was eventually taken over by Sick Kids at Toronto when the grant, the CIHR grant ran out. But it was quite helpful in creating a much more upfront kind of a network amongst this small cadre of folks. These were all pediatric people. And so I have experience with that. I was a center leader for that at UBC. Happy to help you sharing some of that experience if that would be helpful at some point. And good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the challenges here, I'll just kind of add on that, and that I'm sure everyone can relate to, is how many networks can I actually invest in?
Yeah.
And we all have these really intersecting groups, and this has really been a challenge for me in this thing. And I was actually trying very hard to, I was very hesitant to encourage this network to form, actually, because I feel a little bit overloaded with the stuff I'm doing here at UBC. And while in principle this is a great thing, I wondered if maybe this is one of the great things I should say no to. And so I've been kind of a reluctant joiner, and in the end, I thought we should give it a try. We should stop talking about it and either try it or not. And I think the key thing is going to be having the really compelling reason for being a network that we have to work together. And some of these things you actually have to kind of try and put them on for size to figure out what that is, and be a beacon out there. It's a little bit like Ian's video. You have to do the Wizard of Oz thing, and then when we do this, maybe other people get interested and you attract some other people because you actually have something that they could see what it could be. And then that changes it, because now you have a few of the people who are end up going to change the identity of the group. And so I'm looking for someone who is going to lead it, who is not me. Trying very hard to encourage some younger people to step up and actually do the heavy lifting on it. That's been one of our challenges. I have a question for Alan. Just, I was intrigued that how you ended your talk with this reach out from a VR company that's interested in doing affect within a VR environment. And I wonder if you could talk a little more about that. That sounded very intriguing.
Well, it literally is early days, and I don't want to talk about the company while we're being recorded, so I can't tell you anything about that.
Okay, maybe another time. Yeah.
Sorry. But I can say that the desire for research funding, they seem to know what they're doing. They seem to be very aware about what programs are out there. So it's all very encouraging.
I'm going to suggest that we jump on to the discussion about whether this kind of thing is useful to try and continue. Christine, I think, already has alluded to some interest in it, and maybe others, now that you've seen some examples of what other groups have done. I think hopefully everyone is aware that right now we do not have funds to distribute in this way, because we elected for the GCRC. These funds came from our GCRC grant. And we are now operating under a shoestring because we elected to take 2 years of funding at half the rate, so that we didn't have to apply every year, because that was really stressful, and give us some breathing room to actually think about what we want to do next, which we are doing. But it means we do not have a generous budget. Basically, our budget covers staff and very little else at this point. So we don't have stimulus funds right now. But if we did, what would people want to do with them? How much do people want them? And if this is an exciting prospect for people, then is this something we should put on our list of stuff that DFP really should be supporting this, because it's so valuable as we do our strategic planning and figure out what we want to do when we grow up for DFP? Should this be on the list, and how would you use it?
And I think we could also point out that we have a couple other members on the call who received stimulus funding, and not to
Please speak up. Yeah,
not to point you out, but if you're interested in giving your feedback on your experience, that'd be interesting to hear too. Mike, I think you raised your hand.
Oh, just to indicate that I had that our group had in fact received stimulus funding about last year or 2 years ago, I think, and that helped indeed put together some demo materials and to apply for an NSERC grant for a company I'm working with to develop an interface social robot for assisted living facilities. So that was very useful to move the project ahead a bit, and as the call for this program to actually create some demo material. And I think we actually may have, I'm not quite sure what happened, but I know Sina Radmard, who was the principal person being paid from stimulus grants, he moved to another job, so that made it a bit difficult to get him to give a talk for this particular session.
Can I just say that, I mean, initially resented is not probably the right word, but was challenged by the lack of it being used for research, and that it had to be used for, something else. But actually, in some ways, that was very ultimately effective for us to pushed us in a different direction, I think. I would say, though, it'd be nice if there was a proportion that could be used, I would say, explicitly for research, because as researchers, that's your go-to spot. And sometimes when you encounter some situations around the network, you think, oh, we could study that, but you can't really directly use the money for that. So I would say using maybe most of it being kind of earmarked for networking, but having a subcomponent that could be used for research would be helpful.
Just probably people are aware that for the past stimulus funds, that was not even a variable that we had any control over. There was very strict constraints on what we're allowed to spend the GCRC funds for. I think there's a very small modification to that in the most recent round, not the one that we're being paid out of right now, but the ones that are being applied for this year. But it's not a really significant change. But if we were trying to extend this program and fund it out of other sources, then that would be different. I think it's really interesting what you're saying about kind of being pressed. I would remind everyone that they were not limited to networking, and in fact, what Ian did, I would not classify as networking, and I think some of the others as well. It was really, we tried to say like about the only thing it can't be it's for research, and the whole goal, you're supposed to think very broadly about how you can get unstuck from something. I think other ideas that came up, it could be done for like maybe skirting the boundaries of the definition, is doing a literature review or something, like you just kind of, I have a concept, I have an invention idea, and I want to make sure that no one else has done it before, almost like a patent search. I believe one person, perhaps Donwick, used stimulus funds to do a patent review, to actually verify if a concept that they were developing was on the right track and clear of prior art, and which is something that might be hard to come up with the funds from other sources to do that, but it's an important thing to get you unstuck from a holding pattern maybe of being unsure. So really, there's like, do people have ideas of other things they can imagine wanting to use funds like this for?
I found the constraint very useful in that it forced me to think of something to do other than research. As Alan says, that's my go-to, and being forced to think, okay, so what else could I do that would be useful was an interesting exercise.
Yeah, I would echo that, Ian. Yeah.
Maybe we should ask for a little show of hands or something on who, I would say even include the students in this too, because even though you're not the ones who might be writing these grants, perhaps you have ideas for things that you could imagine doing, but who thinks we should find a way to keep on doing this? Just very, very simple, maybe with conditions, maybe with changes, but who thinks this is worth investing? Interested in, maybe people could, can you raise your hand on the poll? Or
use the reaction button and give a thumbs up.
Yeah, that could be.
If you click on
do
yes,
something.
you get a count.
Yeah, I was actually thinking on the, well, this is useful too. Let's see, lots of responses from the students.
My face is an attempt to say, I feel like I can't just say a yes or a no, but it's complicated. So I feel like, and I'm one of the people that did get one of the earlier stimulus grants as well, and I used it for something sort of most similar in spirit to Karen's. It was to do this sort of Visit UBC group to really try to get everyone together at UBC that cared about Viz. And then my huge challenge afterwards was, what's the right amount of energy to dump into it to keep it going? And then of course the pandemic hit, and I was just like, it is on hold for a bit, although I do want to revive it. I feel like if it was a question of would I put a huge amount of time to do a grant only to fund this kind of thing broadly, the answer would almost certainly be no. But if it was part of something else that seemed to fit a need, and would it make sense to include a component of this in addition to a bunch of other things, then yes. And so that's why I feel like I can't say yes or no. It's like, it's
okay.
complicated.
That's okay. So I think, but it wouldn't be a no, absolutely, this has no value. I think that I think that it's useful to say, I don't think anyone's proposing, well, I am not proposing going to a large effort just to do these things. We're rather in strategic planning for DFP, we're trying to find, we're basically looking for laundry lists of functionalities and services that people find value, and then that allows us to package things together in interesting ways. And imagine filling out a survey that says, here's 10 different things that maybe DFP could do on a scale of 1 to 5. How much would you rank each of these? And I'm hearing tomorrow you might rank this like at a 4, if 3 or 4 if it's packaged with other interesting things, or something like that. And that's fine, but it's not a 0 or a negative thing. And I could see some things. I could imagine things on that list where some people might say, I would never use that.
Yeah,
that's
and
not
I'll mention
I
that
care
for
about.
me, the constraint of don't do research with it, that like wasn't a problem at all. That was like, oh yeah, I didn't even want to. This was exactly supposed to be this like build a community thing. So I didn't even find that constraining. I find it very natural.
I think we're almost at 1, so I think we can close the session, but I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us. I know everyone's super busy right now. This was our last seminar for the fall semester. Our next one is on January 13th with Associate Professor Miguel Nacenta.
This is a quite wonderful HCI researcher who just came to BC last summer. So he's a new colleague that we're excited to have. And so I said for him to come over and give a talk as soon as he was able to.
He's going to be the first speaker of our Winter Term 2 series. And if you aren't already subscribed to our listserv, just shoot me an email and I can add you to it. And that way you get the announcements for all of the seminars. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you to our speakers, and happy holidays.